Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Nicola Kemp and I'm Editorial Director of Creative Brief. Thank you for tuning into this edition of Bite Talks. We have a great session planned for you today under our theme of creative nonconformity, because we believe at this unique moment in our collective and individual history, we have a real opportunity to challenge the status quo of what we've always done. And this opportunity to see the world differently is particularly powerful when it comes to marketing to older women in advertising. So to put it diplomatically, advertising does not have a strong track record when it comes to reflecting the lived experiences of women. And this is particularly acute when it comes to older women and the menopause. I've got a brilliant leader with me today who is challenging this. Melissa Robertson is CEO at Dark Horses, a creative agency founded to focus on sport, fitness, and health. She has been in the industry for over a quarter of a century, and she was co-founder of the creative agency Now, and she was on the board of the women's lifestyle platform, The Pool. She's a genuine champion of gender equality, and most recently has written openly and honestly about her challenging menopausal symptoms, while also simultaneously helping to make the industry a better place for menopausal women by writing an open-sourced menopause policy. Thanks so much for joining us, Melissa.
Hi, Nikki. Lovely to see you.
So to kick off, it's World Menopause Day today. So the cynics around us, and let's face it, we've got a few cynics in our industry, could be thinking, oh, menopause, marketing moment, one panel, and then we'll forget about it for another 12 months. I'd really love your view. Do you think that there is a more fundamental shift afoot, more of a sort of collective fuck you, really, at this kind of stereotype of older women that we've seen?
Well, I wish I could say yes, but regrettably, I think we're still at the tip of the iceberg. This will be the 12th time that World Menopause Day has happened. It started in 2011. And whilst it might feel as if more noise is being made, I would say that it's almost a bit of the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon for those non-menopausal people making the effort to engage. That sort of classic cognitive bias of becoming aware of something and therefore noticing it more, like red cars or prams if you've suddenly got a baby, or people on crutches, whatever. I mean, maybe that's a little bit glass half full, but this topic has been banged on about for years, arguably in something of an echo chamber. I think many of us women, and I struggle to think of myself as an older woman, I think we do think fuck you to the ridiculous stereotypes, but our work most definitely isn't done.
It's really interesting, that issue just generally around raising awareness in itself almost sometimes becoming the goal, or actually, and that's really not enough in terms of having a real change. I mean, could you tell us a bit about the menopause mandate?
Yes, of course. Menopause Mandate was launched back in May and has since become a not-for-profit organisation, of which I'm one of the directors, and Mariella Frostrup is our chair. We've got an amazing group of patrons, including the Labour MP, Carolyn Harris, but also Davina McCall, Gabby Logan, Lisa Snowdon, Penny Lancaster, Carol Vorderman. There are also a bunch of prominent medical experts, including psychiatrists, GPs, gynecologists, dermatologists, nutritionists, healthcare lawyers, and then a whole load of brilliant advocates and supporters. And together, we're committed to creating a coalition of campaigners to revolutionise the support and advice women receive from both our health service and wider society. It's fundamentally about reform, education and support, from making menopause a protected characteristic at work. So under the 2010 Equalities Act, you have gender, ethnicity, age, disability, mental health and pregnancy, but not menopause. But also the cost of HRT, even though Parliament's passed a bill to reduce HRT cost to an annual prescription charge, it hasn't been implemented yet. Access to HRT, so 44% of women have had to wait a year to receive treatment because there are so many issues with HRT supply and menopause specialists. And I'm experiencing that. I went on HRT a couple of months ago. When I got my prescription, I had to go to 6 different chemists until I found one that had it. I've also been told that I could really do with testosterone, but I can't be prescribed testosterone by a GP. I have to go to a menopause specialist, and the queues are insane. You would have thought in London it might be a little bit faster because there are a few more of them, but I got referred at the very beginning of summer, and my appointment is on the 23rd of January 2023. So it's insane. We need more medical education. 42% of doctor training courses in the UK at universities don't include menopause, and as a result 25% of women are being misdiagnosed and prescribed things like antidepressants.
It just feels like another example of women's health not being taken seriously. And that's something I'd really like to get your view on, because we are in quite an ageist industry. Like, the statistics show us that. And you've written really openly about your experience of the menopause. You're talking about it now, but there's still such a squeamishness around it in the industry. And I've spoken to people who've said what they're suffering with, but they're like, I would never talk about it publicly. I still don't even publicly talk about my age, which is just quite suffocating in many ways. I mean, why do you think it's important to change that narrative, and what have your experiences been?
Well, first of all, I just don't think I could be doing my job if I hadn't been open and honest about how I was feeling, the fact that I was really struggling. I really felt, and I've sort of said this, I felt as if I was losing my mind. You have this completely irrational anxiety, things that obviously our jobs are slightly stressful and there are periods of sort of anxiety, but this feels far more irrational. And I'll come home to my husband and say, I feel so tense across my chest and my stomach, and I can't get rid of it. And I have to take myself to one side and almost have a word and go, this is ridiculous. This is no more stressful than it's been before. You're okay. You can do this. But, you have night flushes, which affects your sleep. It leaves you feeling pretty tired. But for me, my most challenging symptom was, and still is, what I would describe as word holes. They're just basic everyday words generally that I use repetitively in work and home life, and they can sometimes change, and I just can't find them. I'm sort of always trying to grab them, and I just can't get them. I know exactly what they are, but my brain can't find them, and it's terrifying and embarrassing, and it's like a permanent game of articulate. I have to talk around stuff until people sort of guess what it is that I'm trying to say. And I found a few coping mechanics, like creating a word hole glossary at the beginning of my book, because I know what the word is. So if it's written down, I can find it. But most importantly, I've told people in the agency what was going on, and I needed their help, And since we've been talking about it, I would guess that at least half of the agency have subsequently gone on to talk to their mums about menopause, which I love. And I think it's really healthy. To date, menopause has been miles off any agenda. Menopausal women are just expected to put up and shut up, even be something of an office joke. 50% of the world are going to go through this period of hormonal turbulence, and the other 50% are going to be working with, married to, parented by these women. We have to make menopause an issue for everybody to give a shit about.
I think it's such an interesting challenge as well, and such a role there for the creative industries, because even the term word hole, which, full disclosure, I was trying to explain to someone the other day and I couldn't remember the word hole, which really looked like I was trying to kind of make a point, but I just couldn't remember. But it just made me think, this is such a universal experience, but so much of it is wordless. So actually kind of the power of that, finding that common thread or that way to talk about it is really incredible. And thinking about as well the role of women as leaders, and it's that red thread really to some degree between the lack of authentic representation of older women in advertising and perhaps the lack of women in creative leadership as well. And that there was a stat that came out last week from the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report. And on the world's current rate of progress, we're going to have to wait 132 years until we reach gender parity, which is just such a huge weight. And I really have a feeling, especially Gen Z coming into the workplace and just across the board, really, a sort of frustration with that rate of change. And I'd love to get your view. I mean, what do you think in terms of what really needs to happen? Because just anecdotally as well, I do feel, and I know there's lots of stats around the disproportionate impact of COVID on women in the workplace, but this sense of depletion that I'm seeing particularly amongst women in the workplace, I wondered what your view is, because obviously the menopause is a particular pinch point. Do you think women are still being squeezed out, or still feeling like they can't own their experience?
Yes, definitely. Bloomberg conducted a study a couple of years ago that suggested that more than 900,000 women left their jobs as a result of menopausal symptoms. That's 10% of menopausal women feeling they've got no choice but to leave. And actually, I believe that there's something like 25% of women consider leaving their jobs. But they feel they have no choice to leave because they're not getting the support that they need. And in fact, menopausal women, specifically women between the ages of 45 to 55, make up the largest cohort of suicides in women, which I think is a very little talked about statistic. And I think it's quite horrifying. In the workplace, this sort of feeling of being at a slight loss is disastrous. If we don't get more people talking about it, really talking about it with understanding, empathy and support, then too many good people will be lost. The statistics are shocking. And actually, on the gender pay gap, slightly misleading, because it looks as if progress is being made. It looks as if it's been in decline. And as you say, the COVID has had an impact, and many more women were furloughed than men. So it's a bit difficult to look at the last couple of years, because there are a few blips. However, if you look behind the numbers, you can see that the gender pay gap for full-time workers under 40 in 2021 was under 3%. But post-40, and this is where the reports euphemistically call it changing employment patterns, the gap leaps to 12%, over 12%.
And that gap is having such an impact on the decisions that people make in terms of, through COVID and past COVID as well. But I wonder if there's a link with that gap as well, and the lack of older women in leadership positions, because that makes younger women starting their own careers look to the top of organizations and think, maybe not, this industry isn't for me, like there's not a long-term future. And I just really wondered, because we look at so many stats and we hear those stats about the economic value of older women. There's still the kind of fight the signs of aging messaging we get sometimes, but older women are a phenomenally powerful consumer group, but also a real untapped creative force in our industry. What's your view on that? Do you think that there is enough understanding of that? Because I see a lot of individual initiatives, but I'm not necessarily seeing that's real change when it comes to some of those hard numbers, like the number of women in leadership or the gender pay gap. They're not shifting.
No. And I mean, I don't know how much you can sort of bang on about it, but creatively, financially, emotionally, functionally, the workplace, will be better with more gender parity at the top. Women's brains, their voices and influence are vitally important in the world of business. And this isn't coming from a die-hard feminist. I sort of have ups and downs about even the sort of terminology of feminists. I'm definitely one, but all these sort of insults that are hurled about die-hard or whatever. Anyway, I'm not a man hater, but it's from decades of evidence that show the importance of gender balance in a work environment, particularly at senior levels, because women on the whole, and there are definitely exceptions, make pretty good bosses. They create great work environments. They give a shit about people, progression, mental health, culture, and they've got quite a lot of business acumen too. And there was a great quote from McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report last year, which said, compared with men at the same level, women are doing more to support their teams and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Women in leadership positions not only create healthier cultures, they make for better business. Those with 50% or higher female leadership are more likely to outperform their competitors. So you sort of got the best of both worlds. Why don't we want more of that?
It's so interesting as well in terms of taking some of that data and creating change, because particularly in the sports field, you know, that the impact of the women's Euros is something that I still think that we are unpacking in such a brilliant way. Like this weekend, I watched just twice as many girls out not watching that would always usually come and watch their brothers, but actually having a kick around. And you just think, actually, you can create change through changing the narrative and changing the people that you're putting on a pedestal. And I'd really love to get your view, because I think what you've done at Dark Horses in terms of open sourcing your menopause policies is really generous and really brilliant. And we'll link to it on the article around this video. But I'd really love to get your view about your advice to businesses who want to better support individuals going through the menopause. I mean, where do people start?
Well, I suppose just sort of going back to even why I wrote the policy, it was because I'd sort of written a bit about menopause, and as a result of that, I was asked if we had a policy, and we didn't. So I sort of thought, well, right, I'll rectify that. Although I did have a moment where I was thinking, hang on a second, why am I writing a policy just for me? Because I was the only person who was sort of, anywhere near menopause. But as my knowledge deepened, I sort of learned, maybe even decided on two key things. The first, it took me fucking ages to research what menopause was, what it does, and why, as well as coming up with, solutions as to how to support women going through it in the workplace. And perhaps, because it was so arduous and time consuming, that's why so few places have put one in place. So I thought, well, actually, this let's make it open source, and it would be much easier to start from somewhere rather than from scratch. And therefore, more companies might just do it. Although I've since heard some stats that would suggest that 85% of our industry still don't have one in place. The second thing was my growing realization and an annoyance, frankly, that any menopause policies that did exist in the world were written for women, when in actual fact, providing a few desk fans or offering up cameras off or a helpful list of resources just kind of somewhat misses the point. These aren't enough to transform how supporting menopausal women, might feel in the workplace. What we need is everybody reading, understanding, empathizing, and acting on it. It can't just be a policy for women. It has to be a policy for everyone. But, as an organization, a policy is a great place to start, but accept that it's not enough. There needs to be awareness, discussion, education, training, support, and empathy. And it'll take time and effort to coordinate, but it will pay back in spades.
It's really interesting as well, that initial insight of, I'm making a policy, it's actually not applicable to that, because that's something that comes up with companies when I've talked to them about the menopause and menopausal policies. And it's interesting because even that process of going, actually, we don't have women in our we don't have that many women in our organization who this applies to, that surely has to be a big question of why is that, and what are we going to do about that? Because that's a huge, we talk so much about the war for talent, that's a huge amount of talent that's missing from our businesses.
But also, I would say it's not even within their businesses. It goes back to the other 50%, even if you don't have women in your businesses, which of course is awful, you're going to be dealing with women who are going through menopause in some capacity.
Yeah. So it's really about getting those conditions in place and that empathy in place to reset the workplace to actually make it more empathetic and understanding.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I couldn't do it without people at work knowing that it isn't inappropriate to leap in with a word. It's not mansplaining. It makes it stops the game of articulate.
As long as you don't forget the word hole.
that's actually, word hole is not one of my word holes. You know, I'll say it to my kids, oh, sorry, I just can't. That's one of my word holes. And then they'll sort of guess. But yes, word hole has never been one. Just one of yours, Nikki.
And it's World Menopause Awareness Day today, but really this work is ongoing, championing change and challenging the stereotypes of older women in advertising. And with that everyday job in mind, what is the one thing you would like our viewers to do to create change? Like what's your call to action?
Well, clearly, if anybody who has the power to do so could put a policy in place, because clearly lots of people haven't. You know, there is some discussion at board level, but I do feel that perhaps it's politics that gets in the way a bit. You know, are people having these conversations that kind of go, hang on a sec, if we put a menopause policy in place, should we have a period policy or a miscarriage policy, a mental health policy? You know, the list goes on. And the answer, of course, is yes to all of those, but it's a rubbish excuse. You know, Rome wasn't built in a day. Put one policy in place and then build from there. You know, you don't have to go from 0 to 60. Just start making it happen, feeding it out. But really, the most important thing that any one of your viewers could do is spread the word. You know, the positive conversations that are happening in predominantly female forums and platforms. In fact, you know, women of a certain age forums. And this won't work if it happens in an echo chamber. We need young women, young men, and of course, senior men to get the conversation going. They're the ones who can genuinely make the real difference. You know, put simply, and forgive the double language, but we can't change the change without them.
Thank you. And that's such a powerful point to end on. And you've been such an important part of those positive conversations happening. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. And thank you for opening up for your own experience, because I think it's these stories that are going to help create the change. And you've got no excuse, viewers, because there's an open source policy that's all good to go. So I know it's World Menopause Awareness Day. So if you want to do something today, just copy and paste that link into an email and send it around your teams and get started. So thank you so much, Melissa, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, Nikki. Lovely to be here.